Hello, everybody hello, everybody that is joining us. Um, Welcome. We're going to start in about a minute or two once we've got a few more people in the room. I know it's at the end of a long day, um, so really glad to welcome you. My name's Kezia Featherston. I'm one of the co-founders of Women Ed, and I'm going to be chairing this evening. Um, We have the chat function available if you have any comments or questions that we can pick up towards the end. Please feel free to put them in. Really delighted you're able to join us this evening. We are hoping that it will last for about an hour. Um, I have a sneaky feeling, because several of our panelists have quite a lot of things to say, that we might overrun on some sections, but it's such an important topic that I'm not necessarily going to cut anybody off because that's quite rude. Um, and I'm now going to hand over to my lovely colleague and friend, Vivian Porritt from Women Ed, who is just going to welcome everybody.
Hello, everybody. We've still got people joining us this evening. So we are recording this session and we'll send the recording out for those people who miss any parts of it. Women Ed and our partners at this event, BAME Ed, Head Teachers Round Table, NFER and universities. We're really delighted that people have wanted to join this event. Over 250 were booked in, and people will be joining us throughout, I know. So it's an important discussion, both to share what the issues are in what's happening for diverse applicants into initial teacher training, and how can we unlock the pipeline from initial teacher training all the way through to senior posts in education. So it's a big topic, an important topic, and this is going to be the start. And we're delighted you're joining us. And please add things to the chat and add resources to the chat. Thank you, Kezia.
That's wonderful. I'm going to ask each of our contributors to introduce themselves as they start to talk. Otherwise, you might miss something a little bit later on, people that join us shortly. I'm going to ask Jack Worth from NFER if he can take us through some of the research and some of the data that NFER has been examining recently and what their next steps are.
Thank you very much, Kezia. Thank you for inviting me. I'm afraid I'm at Paddington Station, so I hope you can all hear me okay and the Wi-Fi holds. I'm Jack Worth, schoolwork lead at the National Foundation for Education, and tells us about this topic, which is a really important topic and something we've been focusing on. We did a big research report in 2022 on the state of racial equality in the teaching workforce in partnership with Teach First and Ambition Institute. And I'll share some of the key insights from that, the kind of the key chart. If you like, maybe someone can sort that out for me in a second. But it's worth prefacing and saying that how we measure ethnicity has many flaws, really, in that it doesn't reflect the kind of individual, rich and hugely diverse racial and cultural backgrounds that many of us have, that we all have, and putting people in kind of boxes around ethnicity is uncomfortable and it's difficult and it's not quite right. But on the other hand, it's necessary for being able to systematically highlight some of the disparities that do exist using the best fit methodology. So we rely on the Office for National Statistics way of measuring ethnicity. Oh, I still can't add the chart, but what I could do is I could put a screenshot of it
Yeah, sorry about that, Jack. I can't give you the permission to do that at the moment.
I can. There you go.
The research tells us.
Try that, Jack. Try that, Jack.
Oh, that was all right. Try now. Did you say?
Yes,
Oh, yes,
try.
perfect. Yes, I can do right. Just makes it slightly easier because it's a good visual for talking about this. Thank you very much. So I think this chart summarizes a lot about the situation with racial equality in the teaching workforce. And I think it tells us three really key things. So the first is on towards the right-hand side, which is kind of unsurprising and something we've known for a long time, which is that senior leaders in our school system are not representative of the wider population, of our communities. This is relative to the population of the same age, and even less so than compared to the pupil population, where younger cohorts, younger generations, even more ethnically black, mixed, and other ethnic groups, and slight overrepresentation of leaders in our schools don't represent the community. But there's some optimism. On the left-hand side, you can see there that actually among applicants to initial teacher training, there's no shortage of interest from minority ethnic groups in terms of wanting to be part of the teaching profession. There's a large number of applications, and actually among applicants, they're overrepresented. So this is really important to note and to see there's been an increase in the diversity of applicants coming into wanting to come into teacher training. However, the final thing this chart tells us is the slope, the downward slope. And that tells us that there are really significant disparities at every stage of degree all the way through. And that's why we particularly want to focus on ITT, why this research highlighted that it was important to focus on ITT. And that's because you can see the steep decline there on the left-hand side, that the disparities are actually largest in the in ITT out of the whole system. So while we have an underrepresentation of senior leaders, we shouldn't then just focus on, well, how do we appoint senior leaders? That's important, and that's a really significant part of this picture. But it's not the only point. And actually, we need to focus on the whole system, and in particular on ITT, because of the big disparities we see in acceptance rates and also progression rates onto teacher training courses and into the profession. So,
I have a sneaky feeling, Jack, that your Wi-Fi has now finally died.
kind of
my there we are.
Am I back? I'm so sorry about my Wi-Fi. I'm doing my best. Yeah, in terms of our next steps, we are conducting more research to look at this in a lot more detail, as well as taking the insights from this research to really promote action. We've already seen action from some organisations, and trying to promote that even more, turn it into action. So before my Wi-Fi entirely dies, I'll hand back to you, Kezia, and looking forward to the discussion.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Before you quickly go, Jack, we're mindful that that data is mostly from 2021. Is there going to be any updates anytime soon?
We hope so. We hope so. Yes.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Jack, thank you for joining us and persevering with your Paddington Wi-Fi. We're now going to go to Alana, who is one of the co-founders of BayMed, and then also Evelyn and Colvin, and just talking about this from your particular perspective. Alana?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kezia. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alana Gay. I am one of the co-founders of the Black Asian Minority Ethnic Educators, BAME-Ed. And we deal with everything that has to do with education and representation across education. And this is one of those areas where when we think about it, we have to start with everyone's why. Jack told us about a large proportion of applicants from diverse backgrounds coming into education. Well, what is it that drives them towards it? And we need to first dig deeper into the data, because if you have detail in the data, then you're closer to finding the truth. So when we think about these applicants, what is it that they're applying for? Well, the first case would be those who are of ethnic minority and female. Well, there's some family commitments that they have. So therefore, teaching provides a convenient vehicle by which they can develop a career as well as be able to take care of their families and other cultural and traditional responsibilities that they have. Alternatively, we can look at this from an economic point of view. So if we think of the different strata of parental income, if someone has done really well academically and they're of ethnic minority heritage and their parents are middle class earners or middle income earners, then they're less likely to come into teaching as a profession. Why? Because culturally and traditionally, their parents will encourage them to go into professions such as being a doctor or engineer. So it's part of a trope, but there are some accuracies in terms of the aspiration that they have. So let's think about the ones who actually are the ones that are likely to apply. They're the ones that are likely to be from lower income earner parental homes. Now, what's the experiences that we know that they have inside of school? And what is the provision that we make for them in school? Well, we ensure that they have sufficient feedback, sufficient social and cultural capital to access what is effectively a middle class profession. Why is it that when we come to initial teacher training and applications for it, we don't put the same provisions in place? Why is it that when someone falls out and they don't meet the requirements, we instead expect part of a finished product to be in place to apply and come into teacher training almost ready to be an absolute teacher? What are the criteria that are being used? Have we demystified the criteria that are being used so that everyone has fair access and fair understanding of what's expected of them? And are we ensuring that those people who are unsuccessful get substantive feedback so that they know what elements they need to go and work on before they come back to become even better applicants in the process? When we talk about the pipeline, we need to see the pipeline not so much in terms of the people that are applying, because they are the ones that are putting themselves forward. The fault in the pipeline is with us in our recruiting and the selection criteria that we use that are based on all traditional tropes of what makes it the best teachers. But if we really think about it, we don't get the best possible teachers. We get whoever's the best on the day. We get whoever is able to present themselves in a particular manner. We get whoever that person who's doing the recruitment for ITT, whether at a skit, whether at university or otherwise, what they perceive to be the best possible or the best potential for teachers. And we know that within our general society, that the criteria that is applied does not necessarily take into account the potential that people have, the inherent potential that they have to become great teachers in the future. So what is it that we need to look at? Well, we can look at the participants themselves and ensure that when we have applicants, they're given sufficient feedback and alternative routes that they can move through so that they're able to become successful teachers in the future. I can hold my hand up and say that's how I became a teacher. A head teacher took a chance on me. When I moved from Trinidad into the UK, in my interview, I said very plainly, and I'm going to show my age now, I do not know what a national curriculum is, and I don't know what the Key Stage 3 national curriculum is, so I cannot answer that question. And they still hired me. And because at the end of that statement, I said, but I am one of the best learners that you will find, and I will learn it in no time. We need more people who are going to look at the teaching pool as it stands and bring them in that sense. We need to get more head teachers and more skits and more universities that are going to take a chance on potential and look at the actual learning capabilities of the applicants rather than just what is written on paper around them. If we're able to do that, we'll be able to build a much, much better sector, and we wouldn't have the shortage we have now. And I'm going to end with one final point in saying the next thing we need to look at are the people who are languishing in supply and cover supervisor and teaching assistant roles. Because when you're unable to access, if you are dedicated to getting a career in education and you're unable to access teaching as a point of your career, more likely you're going to go into being a teaching assistant to try to gain some of those elements. But then you end up languishing and remaining in that post because the probability of progression and the probability of being spotted and being allowed the opportunity to progress into initial teacher training are slim. When someone comes from abroad, they might be well trained abroad. However, when they come to the UK, they need to ensure that their training is updated and they have to go into the initial teacher training pipeline. Sometimes they don't, and they end up staying within the supply system for a really long time as instructors, underpaid, undervalued. So we're missing out on many different elements, not just those coming from university, not just those who are coming to us from abroad, but also those who are already present in our schools, capable and willing to be teachers, but they're just not getting the opportunity for access. So I'm going to hand over to Evelyn at this point, I believe.
Thank you, Alana. Just before you do, can I just announce that we can't get the chat to work? So any comments at all, put them all in the question and answer section, please, and we'll deal with them there. Thanks, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah, great. Okay. I'm having trouble with my Wi-Fi and I can't hear you guys very well, but I know Jack's data, so I'm not going to repeat that. And I caught most of what Alana was saying. So I totally agree with everything that Alana has said around how we facilitate the application process, what that looks like, looking beyond an application and seeing potential. So I'm not going to talk about that, but what I'm going to talk about is once we unblock that pipeline, because I do think it's important that we recognise the journey and the journey for people of colour. So let's hope that the pipeline is unblocked. Let's hope that the powers that be look at the research and hear these conversations. But when we move beyond that, it's what does it look like for people of colour in the profession in terms of their opportunities. And I'm sure there are many others on this call who have the lived experience of being fortunate enough to actually get into teaching. But then when we do pass that part of the pipeline then gets blocked again. And so for me, it is actually unblocking it at every single point of our journeys. So we come into the profession, we come in with a passion to want to make a difference, to share our knowledge, to be strong role models for our communities, but essentially to make a difference for the young people that we serve. In terms of decision-making and really having a seat at the table, for many people of colour, we're blocked. So just thinking about the progression routes, and I don't think that you can take ITT in isolation. I think you need to look at the system as a whole. You need to look at the whole journey from when you're an ECT and you are moving up to middle leadership and then on to senior leadership. What are the opportunities available? And why is it that we only have 3% of head teachers who are Black or Asian? That is not okay, because what happens on our journey, and I have lived experience, I'm sure there are people on the call who have lived experience, is that whether we like it or not, our system is systemically racist and it is stacked against us in terms of progression. And I think until everybody gets a little bit uncomfortable and leans into this, then we will forever be where we are. And there's organisations like the National Governance Association who are doing some really good work in terms of looking at governors, because it is the governors that will appoint us as leaders. A, they're not diverse enough, and B, we have governors who look at us and think, that's quite risky. To have a Black or Asian leader leading our schools. And so I think that until people really recognise the lived experiences and the challenges that we face from becoming an ECT through to middle leadership, then on to senior leadership, we will never truly have diverse representation in our schools. And so what does that mean? It means that our young people, Black and white, are missing out on fantastic teachers, fantastic role models. And we have young people who think that if you're a Black man or a Black woman, or an Asian man or Asian woman, you don't want to become a teacher. Well, Jack's statistics will tell us that we do want to become teachers, but we're blocked. And so when we're looking at our young people are looking at us and thinking, where are our role models? We're not in the profession. And they clearly think that we don't want to be teachers. We do want to be teachers. We do want to be leaders. But the system is set up against us. Hence, we need to do something about unblocking the pipeline from ITT to middle leadership to senior leadership. The lived experience for many, including myself, is that we come up against racism, we come up against microaggressions, we come up against biases, and until those are truly, truly addressed, we will not have a profession that is representative. So we unblock ITT, we unblock middle leadership, unblock senior leadership, and then we will truly have diverse representation in our schools. If you want to know more, I have written a book. It's called Her Story. You Cannot Be What You Cannot See. It is published on the 1st of October. I'll put the information in the chat, but it really is a call for action, and it really does shine a light on the systemic racism that is in our system that we all need to do better by. Gonna hand over to, who am I handing over to? Sorry.
We're handing over to Colvan.
Over to you, Colvan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Evelyn.
Right. Well, first of all, can I just say it's just such a fascinating discussion, and I've made a few notes. I'm very happy to have been invited to come on today. Little bit of background about myself. My name's Colvan. I'm currently head teacher of 2 schools in East London, which puts me in Jack's final but one category. I'm also a governor of a secondary school, so I think that might have been the last category. So I've been on every step of that journey, and what we've heard so far is been so powerful that I think that this discussion needs to go beyond today, because the statistics do not lie. Because the argument might be that we're not getting enough people into the profession because they're not applying. Well, clearly they are applying. And then as you move through your career, you are disproportionately underrepresented, whether you're Black, whether you're Asian, whether you're other. And just a few things to think about there is, I agree with the earlier speakers in terms of what are we doing for the people who are making these decisions? Because clearly there is a bias in these decisions, and that bias drives right through the system. And yes, we need to unlock the ITT pipeline in terms of why are insufficient numbers in proportion to those applying, getting places on ITT programs, then actually qualifying, then actually being classroom teachers, and right the way through. And I think if there's more work to be done, I would be really interested in the juxtaposition between race and gender, and whether or not it's disproportionately affecting women. I do think that there's an issue amongst governing bodies that are appointing people of colour in particular, but particularly women of colour. The statistics of Asian, Black men and women in leadership and head teacher positions is frankly embarrassing. And so some of the things that I think we need to think about is how are we supporting people to consider how they're making those decisions? And you're absolutely right. The pipeline is a problem at ITT, but we need to look right the way through. And in terms of my personal experiences, when I started at PGCE, I was the only Asian male on my PGCE, and if it's very difficult to be what you can't see. So we have these notions and perceptions of what it is to be a teacher, what it is to be a primary school teacher, what it is to be an infant teacher in terms of race and gender. So you're fighting that imposter syndrome yourself, and you're having to break down barriers. And sometimes it's good to, because I'm looking at it from a practical level, I'll provide an example, and I'll anonymize it as much as I possibly can. I'm also fortunate, I'm going to say fortunate, that at different points in my career, people took a chance on me. But it shouldn't work like that. The best qualified, the most motivated and able person for the job should get the job, not because someone takes a chance on them or someone wants to give them an opportunity. And I'll give a little example, and I've never mentioned this before publicly, but before I got the job here, and I've had other headships since, because this is the first one that's the challenge, the first governing board who were willing to take a chance. I was interviewed for a head teacher post at a school in London, and I was far and away the best candidate for that job, not because I say so, because that was what the evidence was telling us. And after 2 days, at the end of the second day, after a series of discussions, and it was four of us on the first day, 2 on the second day, the governing board decided not to appoint. And that would have been the end of it. Okay, give your feedback. Well, without breaking any confidence, one of those governors broke rank and phoned me this was on a Friday, phoned me on the Saturday morning to apologise on behalf of the rest of the governing board, and said I was the only candidate and I was the outstanding candidate, and they had a battle, but a number of the governors on the governing board refused to sanction my appointment, and the feedback was that they didn't like what I was wearing. Now, let's be honest, I don't think it's anything to do with what I was wearing. It's the confidence in, can this person lead our school? Is he what we're looking for? And I would argue even having more diverse governing boards isn't the answer, because I think that even diverse governing boards are more likely to appoint a white man as a head teacher than a black woman. And that's, I haven't got research evidence for that, but that's what the evidence is telling me. So we need to see this as the term used earlier is systemic racism. And I think we need to, sometimes people find that scary, but unless we actually accept what the evidence is telling us and that we have got a problem, then we aren't going to overcome it. And what we need to do is we need to share this research, and we need to call this out, and we need to work with groups such as this or beyond to ask the question of how people are making decisions. And some of those decisions are, if less and less people are going into middle leadership, and Jack will know this better than me, because it looks like there's high numbers going into middle, and then there's a further drop into senior leadership, where there's a tendency for people to appoint people more like themselves. When we need to think is, what do our students need? And it'd be interesting to look at the statistics in terms of the groups that we are representing. Recently at my other school, we appointed a Russian-speaking teacher. I can see the impact of that one adult on our children from Lithuania, Latvia, Moldova, Georgia. Their eyes have lit up in a way that is phenomenal. And do we go to the extent to say there's a duty as a governing board and as a leadership team to understand the needs of their students and the importance, taking into account at the assemblies this morning about what happened in the summer, about what we want for our school, what we want for our teaching profession. And the most powerful thing that Jack came up with is It's not that people aren't applying. There's plenty of people applying. And again, do we look at the juxtaposition of race and class? And that earlier conversation of what do we see a primary school teacher or secondary school, we see them as middle class. So are we rejecting these because they're working class? And I've seen those doors potentially slammed in my face. And I think that I and others have had to work harder than we should do because of that relationship between race and working class, which makes it difficult. And the final point is, can we find examples of areas in this country in which we have success stories or particular institutions or particular local authorities? Vivian and I did some work recently in one of the boroughs in South London. What is happening differently in these areas? And the final point, because I know we haven't got very long, is we were visited by senior leaders from Birmingham in the 2000s in our school in London, where they were asking, how did we have such a diverse workforce? I think it was as simple as what I think Alana was saying earlier, that head teacher at that time had made a decision that she wanted to diversify her workforce, and she wanted it to be more representative. But we can't rely on these outliers. We need systemic change. And I'm very happy to work with colleagues in the future on seeing how we can use those success stories and we can support training, not just for governing boards, but at every level for the sake of our students, to make our workforce more representative.
That's brilliant. Thank you ever so much. Thank you again to Evelyn, Alana and Colvin for sharing their quite personal stories. It's a privilege to hear that, and obviously as a white woman in education, very upsetting that this is not my sorry, I've got pets in the room, so it's got really noisy all of a sudden. I'm delighted now that we're going to sort of take this back a little bit into the ITT aspect. We're joined by Professor Sam Twistleton, who I describe her as the queen of ITT, though that embarrasses her a little bit. And we're also joined by Dr. Nazia O'Reilly, and Dr. Amy Quickfall, who are at Leeds Trinity University and have done some substantial work in this area. Sam, I know you just want to preface what Nazia and Amy are going to say.
Yeah, most people know me as the person they blame for everything that they hate about what the government has done to ITT, but please don't blame me. I'm going to speak really, really briefly because I am not an expert compared to the people who are going to follow me in this area, although I have taken interest in it in all my sort of career in ITT. I'm going to mention just a couple of projects anecdotally that I've been involved in. So the two main universities I've worked in are University of Cumbria and then more recently Sheffield Hallam. As you can imagine, very different in terms of the communities they serve, both of those universities. But in both cases, projects I was involved in were actually to get more people to apply. So it's interesting to see the data, because certainly both those places at the time I was involved in them were really struggling just to get enough people to apply. There was a retention problem with the ones who did get on the courses, but there was definitely a problem with getting them to apply. At Cumbria, sort of obvious reasons in terms of the demographic of the community it was serving. Or having said that, it had a lot of students in placement schools in Lancashire, and many years ago, when it was a huge priority for the government, there was a period of time when the government, in the form of what was then called the TDA, did pay a lot of attention to this issue. And funded projects, and it became a focus for inspection and so on. One of the projects that they funded was with between University of Cumbria and Edge Hill University, based in Preston. The thinking was that you needed to create a really local community for the kind of ethnic community in that region to be able to study really, really local to where they lived. And that proved to be really successful. It was great. There were a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise have considered coming into the profession who did, because it was on their doorstep, and they quickly got, through word of mouth, a sense of this is a community where I'm going to see people who look like me. I'm going to be supported by people who understand my needs. I'm going to when I'm applying a lot of the things that you were saying, Alana, people will recognize what I bring in a way that maybe I don't feel confident would have happened if I'd applied to the campus in Lancaster. Then similarly, also Cumbria set up with local authority in Tower Hamlets a permanent base, again for first generation into higher education, into initial teacher training, people from diverse communities to apply. Again, it needed to be on their doorstep, and it needed to have that sense of it's a community that understands me, understands my needs. And again, very, very successful. When I came to Sheffield Hallam just over 10 years ago, South Yorkshire, as you probably will know, has a very diverse community, particularly in Sheffield, where the university was based. So I expected to see a more diverse ITT student population, and I didn't. And this is where, again, we looked at the data. There weren't enough people applying, not enough people of those who did apply were getting on. And then we had a real retention problem with the ones who did get on, particularly on placement. And it does feel like it confirms quite a lot of the comments that have been made. They just didn't feel like they were getting the support. You know, most people will know one of the real make or break aspects of initial teacher training is mentoring. And they just didn't feel like they were getting the understanding and the support from their mentors, is what we were told. Also, across the whole university at Sheffield Hallam, not just in ITT, there is a race gap problem in terms of assessment. There being a big gap between the entry qualifications that people come into the university with, and this is not just Sheffield Hallam, this is across the whole higher education sector. So they whatever their entry qualifications, how they progress is at a much lower attainment level than their white fellow students. And the university has been doing a whole range of things to look at this, to do with anonymous marking, to do with more diverse, different forms of assessment. Again, speaking to some of the points that have already been made, but it's an ongoing challenge. But I will say the university is taking it really seriously. There are some other things that I know that we need to think about in terms of the government requirements for initial teacher training, what counts as standard qualifications that are allowed, that count. I think that there's definitely scope to do something there. I can see Amy nodding. She's probably going to say a bit more about that. So I will shut up now and hand over. I think it is to you, Amy, next, is it?
If that's okay, if Nasia doesn't want to go next. Hi everyone, I'm Amy Quickfall. I'm head of school of the School of Education at Leeds Trinity. So just to give you a bit of our context, and I'm going to be quick as well because Nasia's the star at Leeds Trinity as far as I'm concerned, but we do have a diverse ITE student cohort. 50% of our secondary PGCE students last year were BAME. And we do have, in as far as the data matches up, we do have predominantly sort of working class background students, and we do have a majority of students who were first generation graduates, so they're the first in their family to go to university. So quite different from other universities that I've worked in. So I think my major message that I want to say is that this is a really complex issue. And I know people say that when they're trying to kick the can down the road, and I'm really not trying to do that. But I think we do need to acknowledge how complex this issue is, and every provider are facing different challenges. I mean, in that vein, I want to say as well that I'm not here to be defensive on behalf of the ITE sector, and I might sometimes come across that way because this is the sector that I love and it's my passion, and I'd really like to believe that we never get anything wrong, and of course we do, and of course we have institutional racism, we have structural racism, we have procedural racism, and we're working really hard on that, but the problems persist, and Nasia will tell you more about that anyway. But I think for me, if we want to come up with solutions, and that's what we've all said we want to do today, is to start that process, we really have to engage the sector. We really have to engage the ITE sector. And there's 3 reasons I've come up with for that, that hopefully are compelling. And I am speaking from a university perspective, obviously there are skits, there are new providers, there are national providers as well, and they all have their own take as well. But I think the first reason is the sector intelligence. So, for example, when we're looking at that shocking, awful data about applications, and this is by no means me saying that you can explain this away, because you can't, but there's context in there. So when we look at, for example, at Leeds Trinity last year, we had literally thousands of applications last year from international students, and the capability to offer 50 visas across the university. So straight away, a lot of those applications we can't accept, even though they are brilliant candidates. They fit the bill. We can see how their qualifications are equivalent. We can make that case. We physically can't offer them a visa. So that is a massive issue. And we've got a lot of students, a lot of applicants rather, for example, in Nigeria, who we would love to offer places to, and we can't, because of those sector factors that you need to have people in the sector engaged to understand that, and the barriers that are there. Now, that doesn't explain that data, but it does explain a little bit of it. Second reason, there's a lot of fear in the sector. So Sam alluded there to, there's been a lot of change in the sector. We've had the market review, we've had the accreditation process, and however you feel about that, and there have been good things that have come out of it, there have been negative things in the sector. It's been a massive amount of work. People are very tired. And people are really afraid in the sector. We haven't had the Ofsted framework yet, which will kick off in January with inspections. And there's a real fear of risk taking. So when it comes to, very often in the DFE criteria now, things are flexible, and the DFE are saying, providers are empowered to make decisions and take, look at qualifications, be creative. There's still a real sense of fear about, but what if we do, and then the inspection team don't understand why we've done that, or they can't see how we've come up with that decision. So I think it's well worth understanding the pressures and the fear that exist in the sector, because without understanding that, we're not going to convince people to change. We're not going to convince the sector to change, because fear will always override, won't it? We know that. I think the third reason for me, and then I'll let Nazia talk to you because she's so interesting, but also the sector view of the issue. So as university providers, I can speak for our bit of the sector, we are under immense pressure to recruit and retain students. I mean, that's what we're driven on really hard every day of the year. Recruitment, retention. And so from our perspective, we don't feel that we have lots of freedom in terms of exerting bias, because there's so much pressure. We have to justify, every reject. But as I say, there are issues in the system that stop us from offering places to really good candidates. And I think in terms of opening things up, the DFE got rid of the skills test, they got rid of the requirement for school experience. Lots of those barriers have been broken down, but there are still process biases that mean if you've had a traditional route through your education, if you've had the support of your family, if you haven't grown up in poverty, you're at an advantage from the beginning of that process, and we need to look at that. And people in the sector, they know that better than anyone, because they see those people walk through the door. We interview every applicant, they see those people, they meet those people, they understand the constraints. So that's my play, is that you've started off brilliantly by engaging with the sector and inviting us here, and I would just urge that continues, and so we can bring people on board with us. But thank you.
That's fantastic. Nazia, I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. And then I think there might be a few sort of comments and questions towards the end. It's really compelling. So thank you, Nazia.
Thank you. I feel that's been quite a big build-up. So thanks for being my hype woman, Amy. I'm Nazia O'Reilly. I'm a senior lecturer in education at Leeds Trinity University. I have a couple of other roles there as well. I'm co-chair of LTU's BAME network. I'm a strategic lead for equity, diversity and social justice at the School of Teacher Education, which mainly consisted of me saying to Amy, make this happen. You know, you need somebody, you need this to be acknowledged. What I do here needs to be acknowledged in some way. I'll just take a moment to just explain a little bit about my background, which I hope will be useful in explaining what I do. I'm a primary school teacher. I was a primary school teacher. I spent 10 years in service before moving into doctoral research. As Govan stated, some people took a chance on me, you know, so I was able to get a fully funded PhD. Exploring the implementation of restorative justice practices in schools. And I studied and wrote about themes of voice, risk, self-transformation, and supporting best practice for teachers in areas of social restorative justice. Now, in a nutshell, restorative justice is about being able to tell one's story, right? With a view to being heard, to be acknowledged, to have that experience that you have been through, perhaps painful, perhaps not so painful, but in a way that leads to change, to some kind of transformation. So it's therefore been very interesting to me as an early career researcher entering teacher education to look at the ways in which we listen to our students and to think about the relationship between voice and identity, of being able to speak and to be heard, to be acknowledged, and then to think of all of that in the light of the awarding gap between white and non-white students, the pipeline and the experience of global majority teaching students overall. And as a person of colour, as the first person of colour to be appointed in the Department of Teacher Education at LTU, hearing and advocating for our global majority students was always going to be my work, okay? Whether it was on my contract or not, in my teaching hours or not. And so I really started wondering why the experience of my experience and that of my global majority students was so different and so difficult, because I've always been of the opinion that the experience of BAME members of staff is the same as experience of BAME students as well. And so difficult when on the surface, our department seemed to have every mechanism possible for hearing student voice. Module feedback forms, for example, you know, data collection, and then even on top of that, all the ways in which we mentor our students, whether on school-based training, whether in personal tutoring. So there was this real disconnect here between how we think we were hearing voice, actually what was happening, and then the ways in which those voices were being funneled to me. Okay, so to do that, to really kind of look deeper at that and sort of have maybe some of my assumptions either confirmed or challenged, I formed this project acknowledging the lived experience of global majority teaching students. It was a qualitative research project across 2022 and 2023. We interviewed 15 members of staff, white staff from primary and secondary education, and 12 BAME students from level 4 to level 7. What we found, this is not going to shock you, unsurprisingly, was a real fear. Amy, you talked about this, a real fear of having a conversation, of having a conversation about ethnicity, for example, about race, about difference. And because of that fear, a real default from our staff members of treating everybody the same. Okay. Now, if we're at a party and we're all enjoying and having a nice time, that's fine, okay? You know, the context is important there. The context in which, you know, we want to be thought of perhaps won't be as important. In teacher education, where it is absolutely so important for our global majority students to be heard and to be acknowledged, having that experience of being able to talk about their identity, about their experiences is so important. There was really very little opportunity amongst our students that we interviewed that they had really anybody to talk to. Yes, they could talk in a way, they could talk about, you know, surface things, but not really about the things that mattered. And when students did perhaps bring up experiences with discrimination or perhaps feeling uncomfortable, then these were ignored or deflected. And so it's incredibly difficult for students to even begin to think about who they may go to about these problems. Okay. The result of that was something that we really picked up on in the research were the lines of segregation that were being drawn in the department, not only between the student body themselves, but also between the student body and the staff. Because of that lack of a shared understanding, a shared relationship, and a shared language. We found, well, we don't have time to go into it today, but really the research picked up on sort of certain areas, certain hotspots. Arrival, for example, arriving at the university, arriving with identity, belonging, and then being able to then transition out of that into teacher education. And what we really wanted to do, as well as sort of write up the data, was think about the ways what we found actually impacted our department. Now, it would have been so easy for me to be able to look at the sector, look at all the research being published, read all of that, understand all of that, and then try and start a conversation. Actually, what really mattered to us at Leeds Trinity was that the work was being done here. And because it was being done here, and because it was being heard here and acknowledged by our staff and our students, what we were able to do over sort of 2024, 23, 24 was really open up the conversation. You know, we started off by having small group conversations in seminars as staff members, additional mentoring put in place for students as well, in which staff members were then encouraged. And when I say encouraged, we actually created mentoring resources with, you know, opening up lines of chat, inquiry, and so on. And then really working to ensure that that it wasn't a case of just, opening up and having a conversation, but actually that we had really robust and policies and a real shift in the ways in which we heard and therefore acknowledged our students. And we've had success. We've had continued attrition as well, but we've had some success in opening up those conversations with our colleagues, with our school delivery partners, in ways in which the people now tune into the conversation realise that we are serious about it, that we can take action about it. These actions can be very concrete, for example. If we know that you are struggling in the school, if we know that you're having a bad experience, if we know that you're starting to feel uncomfortable, the historic answer would have been, well, do you want to just get to the end of your placement? Can you just get to the end of the course? We've worked really hard here to find you somewhere. That's no good, is it? That's no good when actually we're thinking about the long-term impact here. We're thinking about that pipeline. We're thinking about who makes it. We're thinking about the transition to ECR, ECT and beyond. What our students ultimately need to hear is that we heard you and that we changed. We made a difference for you. And that's really the work that we're doing. I'm very fortunate to be able to work with Amy and other colleagues here as well. I'll finish there now. Thank you very much.
Nazia, thank you so much for sharing that. Really interesting. If you again, if anyone does have a research or links or documentation, please put them in the question and answers. We'll do our best to share them afterwards. Unfortunately, Colvan, his computer shut down on him, so we'll try not to take that too personally. I'm going to hand over. We've got about 5 minutes now. Maybe 6. Vivian has been sort of checking the questions section, and there might be a few comments and questions that she may direct to either all of you or just one or two of you.
Thank you very much, Kezia. I'm not going to direct them to anybody in particular because a lot of the questions were quite broad about the broad issues, but it'd be really interesting if people in the panel have got some responses after that. Quite a lot of very similar issues. picking up the cost about picking up the point about how to navigate the costs for trainees, particularly around equivalences, resets, etc. So for a lot of people, that's then trying to bring in a wider group of people into the profession, but they may not have the expectations and the background qualifications to do that. And that's a cost to the trainees. And how can that be better navigated? There's a broad point about needing to make teaching more attractive for everybody, yes, through pay and conditions, but some specific issues there for people with a diverse background. How can they be helped more in the pre-application stage so they actually get to being able to apply? Where would that resource come from? Who can do that for pre-applicants in that way? One suggestion was, is there a resource anywhere for online supervision to help with that, or to help with the whole application process? And I added the point about resource because that would always be a key question, wouldn't it, for a lot of the things we would all want. A point for school leaders, lots of response about the idea of opening the door for others, as Kulvan was describing, that he had a door opened for him. And quite a few people in the Q&A were saying so did they. And they want very many more people in education to hold the door open for a much wider range of applications. How can we do that? How can we get that message across? A question about, is there anything we can do about the fact that visa numbers are limited? Is there a lobby approach we can use? Who should we be talking, all of us be talking to about that? An intersectionality question came up. Does intersectionality also of class and of gender, as was mentioned by one of the panelists, is that also leading to greater bias, greater process bias? And a question about how do we get more support for mentors when diverse trainees are able to enter the profession? How can we help them navigate the broad pipeline through the education system? So we would have had a lot more, I know, in the chat, but I couldn't figure out how to put it on while we were in the chat.
I'll be honest, Vivian, I think we've got enough there for another 2 or 3 webinars.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
Is there any other panelists that would like to sort of come back on mic and just sort of address any of those either questions or thoughts? Alana?
I think that comes down to us understanding that there is a time where a government has to enter in order to aid with socially driven issues. So if our government and our DFE is very happy to go and recruit overseas teachers, there is no reason why they cannot fund for overseas teachers to have their checks done as long as they're being sponsored so that schools don't have to carry that cost, because they go overseas and recruit anyway. So therefore they need to be running those checks. So that for me is something that the DFE can feasibly step in and put in place in order for that to occur. We also need to, I think, be a bit more practical about what we have as our entry requirements. Quick anecdotal story. There was a teacher who I thought was really excellent English teacher from India, sent her and said, right, I will sponsor you and I will help you get into the teaching apprenticeship route. She wasn't able to enter because the DFE would not recognize her not having a UK GCSE in English. So they wanted to send someone who had a master's in English to go back to do a GCSE in English. And that for me is just wastage within the space. Evelyn?
Yeah, I just want to add a bit of caution around overseas applicants. However, I just think that Well, first and foremost, I think our government and the DFE need to really be aware of what's happening in here, right, where we are right now in terms of recruitment, retention, the ITT pipeline, and they really need to understand the gravity of that. Because if the default goes to, we'll just go overseas and get applicants, I think there's something around the morally we're taking away from other countries and the teaching profession overseas. Now, I can tell you that talking to some heads from sub-Saharan Africa, they said to me it's having a massive impact on their own teaching workforce. And so I think before that becomes a default for us, that actually the DFE, the government, need to look at our system and say, what are we doing? Going back to one of the points in the chat, to make the profession more attractive, number one, terms and conditions, all of that. And are they really aware of the gravity of the ITT pipeline? I'm not sure that they are. Are they really aware of the systemic racism in the system? I'm not sure they are. So I think they need to be listening to this conversation here before looking overseas becomes a default, and actually we're not getting under the skin of the problems that are staring us in the face.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Amy, I know you've got your hand up. We are we're slightly over, but Amy, I'd love to hear you.
Thank you. I'll be really quick. I just wanted to say that I completely agree, Evelyn, about taking teachers from overseas, and I think it's something to be mindful of when we're looking at the data, just how that can skew the data. But I completely agree. It's not right that we're taking teachers from, and nurses and care workers from other countries, is it? So we need to sort out our own issues.
That's fantastic. Vivian, would you like to just sort of, as it were, have the last word? And I do apologise for my dog barking in the background.
I tried to summarise the questions and the points, but there were a lot of points that weren't questions. So we'll put it all together in what we send to everybody after this, because what we all want to do is find some solutions to this, don't we? So we'll share how we can, the routes we can take. And on behalf of Women Ed, we just want to say that our part in this is that we have a new book coming out, and that's structured around our 4 campaigns. So that is absolutely focused on intersectionality, but a whole campaign section is there about diversity, and people from the global majority in education, and ways in which we can improve and sustain and increase the greater diversity of people in our profession. And that's in schools, it's in nurseries, it's in universities. So we hope that the chapters and the case studies in our new book coming out in September will also add to the conversation that we're starting today.
That's fantastic. On behalf of all of us, if you're still in the audience, thank you ever so much. If you do want to contact any of the organisations that are here today, BAME Ed, Women Ed, Head Teachers Roundtable, and then just as usual, we're pretty much all on social media, and you can contact us. And if you want to get involved in maybe pursuing this further, if you email womened@womened.com, it's catchy, then we'll sort of make sure that you're included in any next steps. Thank you, panelists. Thank you particularly for to all of you, and for sharing everything that you have. And we will see you all soon next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.